One Sydney school says that it's ditching digital textbooks and e-books and returning to physical textbooks. The iPads and screens proved too distracting, did not contribute to technology skills, and the kids were actually said to prefer the books to screens.
Is this counter to the progress we expect in education? For tonight's Taking Stock, we're joined by Scott Phillips, Chief Investment Officer at the Motley Fool, and Alex Vikovich, Editor of yourmoney.com.au, author of USA. G'day as well, which is one of our favourite books on our desk, Alex. Thanks, guys. G'day. Welcome. Do you think it's counter to what we would be expecting to see? Or what do you think it says about this point in time?
I love this book because I get to say back in my day. This is going back to the good old days, right? I can get all the stories out back when there was no internet. TV was in black and white. There was horse-drawn carriages in the streets. I get to say I was right all along. It was those damn kids. No, look, you know what's really amazing is I find screens are great, right? We've all got our screens. We've got a million of them in front of us, around us. Have you ever tried to kind of study or learn from a screen? It's really, really hard. You can't flick back a couple of pages, and the human memory works by location, right? How often have you thought, I remember where that was in the book? And your brain can kind of go back to that point in a book or a pamphlet, or you flick between a couple of things on your desk until you get the Minority Report thing where you can literally put your hands in the air and see everything in front of you in one go. Books just have that tangible quality that just makes it easier to learn. So back in my day, we were right. I'll leave it at that.
And that's so powerful. Even my son, he's 4, does that, and we sometimes do the little chapter books now. He says, no, go back to, we do the saucepan man in the faraway tree or whatever. Go back to and he'll flick back. Yes. He says, where's the saucepan man? It's near the front somewhere, even that. So you're right, that is powerful. I hadn't really thought of that before. Alex, what do you reckon as the editor of yourmoney.com.au?
Yeah, that's right. I guess I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't advocating for the wonderful advancements in information and learning that the digital media age has brought. And I truly do believe that kids have got access to information because of the internet that they never had, of course. But on the other hand, I'm still a book collector, a book lover, and I think that there's which is very difficult when you're moving house, as I'm finding out now. Although it sparks joy for me, as Marie Kondo would say. I still think that there is magic in the printed word and in ink. When it comes to kids and learning, I think the research is kind of split. The OECD did a study a few years ago which showed it was kind of negligible, the difference that iPads had made in Kindles. Interestingly though, there's been really good research in remote Indigenous communities, for example, where Kindles and iPads have made a major difference to literacy levels, and lots of great organisations who do that. The other thing I thought when I saw this was, I wonder whether there's going to be a bit of backlash from the kids, because of course we're hearing them be prolific climate activists, really leaning in on this environmental issue, and I know there's a whole debate around whether that's genuine activism or whether they're pawns in some bigger political game. I'm going to leave all of that. But the kids are certainly interested in this topic. I wonder whether having a system where they're going towards cutting down trees rather than going digital is something the kids are going to stomach.
That's a fair point.
Something I said to Chris was interesting, that the school had said, okay, well, we'll just go back to those physical textbooks, we'll ditch the iPads and ditch the online kind of type learning environment. Maybe there's something in there at this point in time to be teaching the skills and strategies around, being online is distracting. So, let's show you how to limit. I'm sure they must do it, but, I don't know, just learning how to manage it, because in the end, we're all in a workplace where we barely see any paper and pens, apart from the ones that we bring up on this desk. And you kind of just got to learn to manage it. Maybe there's an opportunity there to say, but this is how it is, and let's teach you how to...
And as much as I want to be able to say it's back in my day, it's probably going to end up a combination of both, right? I have a feeling that they're going back to physical books now. Give them a couple of years, someone's going to say, remember we could look that thing up, or we could pull that YouTube video up, or we could do, pull up the segment of Your Money that we watched last night and see that, exactly. So, I think it's kind of both, right? It's be able to merge the horses for courses solution, and maybe kids aren't the right people to try and do it, maybe they need to be a bit older, maybe the schools haven't yet got it right, but I can't help but think a combination of the reference material, the resource material in front of you, the joy of the printed word, as Alex said, but then to some degree the ability to overlay that with the right device for the right time. And hopefully, as we all, including the teachers, by the way, who weren't necessarily raised as digital natives like the kids are, when we all start to get that combination right, I think there's another generation yet to come, not just of people, but of solutions where we say, let's horses for courses, books sometimes, online the rest of the time.
I think it's fascinating. And to your point, Brooke, about the management, I think that's kind of the most interesting part here, because we seem to be in this place right now where it's either screens all the way on and we're all deeply distracted all the time. We're checking our Facebooks and Instagram constantly. I'm assuming the same goes for students, or it's all the way gone and we're back to books. And I just wonder when some sort of development is going to come in here where we can have a little bit of both, the best of both worlds. I mean, you see a story come up like Hannah Gadsby, the stand-up, who's implementing policies where there's a no screen policy, and she's able to implement that through technology. And you just think, right, how good would it be if a school was able to, implement some sort of digital solution to this so that they can use the screens and the books and not be distracted?
Well, the media industry, of course, are dealing with this, right? And in defence of our colleagues in the newspaper industry, they get a lot of flack for perhaps not having the business model they once did. But they've realised this, right? And they're investing in long-form journalism when it comes to the papers, rather than sort of the clickbait, sort of shorter-form news where you just want to get your information that you might get online. So I do think that we're starting to work out what modes of communication and what types of learning are better suited to different devices. And when it comes to literacy specifically, I think you really want to breed into kids that, emotional connection with learning. And I just don't see people curling up with a Kindle yet in the way that they do with a book. And I think that's still, a healthy part of our psychology.
Yeah. Talking about screens, we've got to talk about the sorts of things that end up being on the screens. And Mark Zuckerberg wants global rules for the internet. In a Washington Post op-ed, the Facebook CEO says that the online world needs clear rulings on what is harmful, what constitutes political advertising, how to prevent sophisticated attacks, and so on. So is he right to throw over his own internal problems with this company that he's created to external leadership? Alex, what do you think?
Look, maybe, maybe rules would be more helpful, but for me, I'm really cynical about this. I mean, when you look at the language of this Washington Post op-ed, what really jumps out to me is that, only a couple of years ago, these were Harvard grads. They were using the language that Silicon Valley wants to talk about: innovation, hope and change, and all that positive language. And now they are completely speaking from the textbook of Wall Street spin doctors. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this article itself was written by a former Wall Street spin doctor, because we've seen this before, which is, we embrace regulation, we embrace government intervention, and what they're actually doing there is the implicit sort of underlying meaning is that a lack of rules is what has caused this behaviour, not our unethical behaviour, not our profligate use of customer data.
The monster we created.
And so it shifts the responsibility onto government, onto rules. That's the first thing. The second thing that really makes me nervous is when large corporates and industry start to talk this way, what usually comes next, and I bet we'll see this, is the Association of Digital Platforms for Justice, right? And you start to have these well-meaning processes that all are about optics, and they look good because they look like they're all about the consumer. But what ultimately happens is these people, lawyers and lobbyists essentially, end up writing those rules. And that's how you get to cronyism and corruption that we've seen, frankly, in financial services. And I think that, we are heading down this path. Maybe I'm reading too much into this article, but that's what I'm seeing in those, between the lines there.
Well, Facebook's under criminal and civil investigations, so probably the right time to bring in those Wall Street spin doctors.
Yeah, that's right.
It's such a crucial time. And as I think as a Google executive this afternoon, speaking with, I think it was SMH, the pendulum has completely swung. After that Facebook massacre, it's been building. But now it's like, you don't get to say how it is. You can write what you want, thank you, but we're not even caring about your opinion right now because that pendulum has swung. It's not going back in your direction.
It's the lightning rod issue, isn't it? All of a sudden galvanised opinion. Interesting enough, too, to Alex's point about the language and the way this is written, it feels very much like the language of the market dominant player. Right? When you are already at number one, what do you want? You want the rules put in place that entrench you as number one by saying, okay, now everyone should play nicely. Let's play by these rules. And when you get to be the big dog, you get to make those rules. Once those rules are made, you get to determine how the game is then played thereafter, right? So even if this isn't the exact reason it's being done, and I think to Alex's point it probably is, but even if it's not, that's the income, right? The Googles and the Facebooks and the Apples and the Amazons and the everyone else's say, actually, no, this is the way we should be playing this. And it'll just so happen it's the way they want to do it with the tools they can use, which stop that disruption. And by the way, the other thing, commercially, so back from a business lens, Mark Zuckerberg's saying, well, if you take political advertising away from Facebook because we're big, it goes somewhere else. Someone else gets the money, right? They get to start something that I don't get access to all of a sudden. And so, again, if you say, well, Facebook, you shouldn't use Facebook for political advertising, for example, or for a particular type of hate speech, you take that away from them, and that's probably justifiable, by the way, but it doesn't mean it goes away. It props up somewhere else. All of a sudden, someone else gets the eyeballs, gets the traffic, gets the advertising dollars, gets the market dominance. And so, again, as a defensive mechanism, he's saying, well, I don't want to or can't afford to actually be the adult in the room. I can't afford to stand on principle when I know my competitors in the Wild West online space are simply not going to. I need to be able to make sure they don't take my business away from me if I'm forced to or choose to play by a set of rules that no one else has got.
Yeah, I agree. I thought this piece was absolutely stunning from Zuckerberg. I mean, there's a part in it where he goes, if we were starting from scratch, we wouldn't ask companies to make these judgments alone. And you just think, the salad days were really good to you guys. You're all billionaires, and now you've got a problem with the platforms that you've created, and you're throwing in the towel. Like, what? But
what's interesting is how long it has taken them to get to this response. Like, this is the textbook response. This is what they would teach you in marketing and public relations school. And I suspect that's because they missed those days, which weren't that long ago, but in Facebook's history are a long time ago, when they had this enormous goodwill. And by writing this sort of thing, they've had to face the reality that goodwill has evaporated, the pendulum has swung. All of that is not to say that perhaps there isn't merit in coming up with some good new international rules and that governments have some role to play. But frankly, I think the best thing that can come out of this is that consumers are engaged and customers and businesses that use these products ultimately vote with their feet. I think that's the only thing that's going to really hold them to account.
Well, we've also had some big headlines made today, locally anyway, from a PR boss, Roxy Jacenko. She's been on this program, that's for sure. She says her new China-focused business has made her realise something, and that's just how lazy Aussie workers are. She says we should be a bit more like the Chinese in terms of our work ethic. Also kind of reflecting on the better times of the past. It didn't used to be like this. Scott, back in your day,
in my day,
were we this lazy? Were we this lazy?
I used to work 25 hours a day and walk to and from school without shoes in the snow, uphill both ways. That's how good it was in the old days. If only people were like that.
Slept in a shoebox.
Exactly. You were lucky to have a shoe. I couldn't afford a shoebox.
How many kids you got? I feel sorry for them.
That's right. I know. They're in trouble, aren't they? I get the approach. I have to say, though, it's kind of every entrepreneur's complaint, right? Throughout time, and as long as we've been doing this, every entrepreneur says, I wish my staff worked as hard as I did. And they point to someone over and say they work harder than we do. I'm absolutely happy to say that some people don't work maybe as hard as we all like them to, or we would work ourselves. But we also know across the OECD, we're one of the hardest working, longest working countries in the world. And so at some level, it's kind of fine to say, well, someone else works harder, right? But it's also the thing about average. Someone's got to be above average and below average by definition. And so if you just simply chase the average or chase the one above you, someone else becomes above you, and where does that end up stopping? There is no kind of solution to that, right? This one-upmanship, we end up all working 25 hours a day. I don't know. It feels a little bit too tough. Roxy's got a great business, doing a wonderful job. The rest of us probably wouldn't have her business, but other people say, look, I'm happy
just to...
Most people
don't even know what she does,
well,
let's be honest.
she does her best to tell us all, Brooke, let's be honest. No, she'd be right. Look, I think, people have their own options, their own lives, their own choices about how often, how long, how hard they work. I think that's fair. Frankly, the harder you work, generally speaking, the better you get paid. We all know that's not necessarily always the case. But also, too, there's some benefit in saying, we've got a pretty good life here. Let's not mess it up by trying to work 8 hours a day. There's kind of a balance to be struck somewhere, I think.
True.
I think, I'm glad to hear Roxy Jacenko's entry into the Chinese market is going well for her. I don't think China is the model here that we should be emulating, and I think we need to keep in mind this is a country where, membership of a certain political party is still a prerequisite to entering most careers, and where state-owned enterprises run the show, right? So I don't think that they are, the bastion of what a good labour market looks like by any means. Having said that, I think that Roxy is onto something here, because as a consumer, I do feel that frustration, particularly in hospitality. I do feel as though, we all have that moment where you're waiting there and you haven't even been greeted yet by the barista, where there is just this general feeling of I don't care, that does permeate our culture somewhat when it comes to not just hospitality but to business. And I do think that, perhaps unsurprisingly, given my pro-American book, I do think the Americans have got this right, certainly more right than the Chinese. I think perhaps some labour market flexibility and, a bit more of an incentive-based culture, tipping and that sort of thing could help. But I also agree with Scott.
Not really slave labour, we don't really need
that.
No,
I think that's certainly beyond the pale. We don't condone slave labour in any way.
I think it was just the way it was executed in terms of our argument, but I think you're right. It hits on a few nerves of like, yeah, we actually
That's
have got
right.
a little bit of that thing going, especially in the service
But it's a
sector
tough one
too.
because I also get Scott's point. I mean, there is a sort of endearing quality to Australian culture that says work is only so important, career stress is only so important, the HSC is only so important, and it's not as important as family and friends and other things. And I do think that's to some extent a healthy part of our culture, but obviously there's a productivity flow-on effect of that and a customer service flow-on effect.
True. It's a classic drum to beat. If you want to get people riled up, get a comment section going. You say kids today aren't working very hard. People in previous generations were working much harder.
And we should be more like the Chinese.
We should be more like, well, that was a bit of a strange one. But no, I did think on the one hand you've got look, I'm answering emails at all hours of the day. Midnight I'll be answering your emails. Chinese people answering emails at midnight. Previous generations. When were they answering the emails? You know, I think the workday kind of ended. We're so connected now, right? Like it's a bit of a different conversation.
And I think Scott's right. When you're an entrepreneur who's started a business, yes, you're that guy or girl who was answering emails all night. But when you've got employees,
Well, yeah.
you know, it's still a workforce, so you've got to run on Australian regulation, etc. So, yeah, there's got to be a work-life balance somewhere. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
Speaking of work-life balance, I don't know if you guys got it today because you had an extremely long day to join us here tonight. Thank you very much.